On June 25, 1950, the first major conflict of the Cold War erupted on the Korean peninsula. The Cold War, which began in 1947, involved a plethora of countries but revolved around the rivalry of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union's ally China. During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union fought many proxy wars which took the place of outright conflict between the two countries. The Korean War was one such proxy war and was caused by a failed compromise between the Soviet Union and the United States. The compromise was doomed because of the two countries' deep mistrust in each other and that they could not control the people they put in power. Although Korea was an independent kingdom for over 500 years, it had been ruled as a Japanese colony from 1910 until the end of World War II. At the end of the war, the three Allied leaders, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin, met to discuss what to do with the world after the defeat of Germany and Japan. In this meeting, known as the Potsdam Conference, the leaders discussed how to reconstruct the European and Asian countries after the devastation of the war. Though with a lack of a common enemy and a lack of trust, the three leaders struggled to come to terms on how to reconstruct Europe and Asia. Regarding Korea, the initial plan was to occupy Korea with the United States south of the 38th parallel and the Soviet Union north of the 38th parallel. After the division of Korea, its Korean leaders wanted to go to war to unify the country. Both South Korean leader Syngman Rhee, supported by the United States, and Kim Il-sung, leader of North Korea, and supported by the Soviet Union. They each wanted to go to war, but they lacked the weapons and financial strength to do that without the support of their superpower backers. Neither the Soviet Union nor the United States would help either side go to war. The United States was worried a Korean conflict could lead to all-out war with the Soviet Union, while the Soviet Union didn't think Kim could conquer South Korea. North Korea invaded South Korea on a warm day on June 25, 1950 at 4 o'clock a.m. Tanks and troops crossed the 38th parallel along with a heavy artillery barrage. Both North and South Korea had an equal number of troops, about 95,000 soldiers, but the North Koreans had battle-hardened soldiers who fought in a previous civil war in China between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek. As the North Koreans advanced on the South Korean capital, Seoul, the South Koreans panicked and blew up bridges to stop the North Koreans. Many citizens trapped on the wrong side of the river died alongside South Korean soldiers. The North Koreans claimed that their invasion of South Korea was in response to what they called a general attack from South Korea. The United States wasted no time in supporting South Korea. President Truman authorized blockades of North Korean ports and dispatched the first United States troops to South Korea. Deciding to divide Korea was a bad compromise that only delayed the conflict instead of resolving it, and perhaps made the conflict even worse. There are three major reasons why the compromise failed. First, to have a good compromise, each side must benefit from it, or else a good compromise can't be established. According to Harvard business professor John Baldoni, our ego often prevents us from seeing what others see, and worse, prevents us from seeing the merits of their case. Strong-willed people often become so consumed by the power of their ideas that it prevents them from examining and understanding another's point of view. Start by understanding the other person's or group's point of view. The United States and Soviet Union were so fixated on their own ideas they couldn't see each other's perspective and create a good compromise that would benefit both of them. One of the reasons they couldn't see each other's viewpoint and the second reason why the compromise failed was that both sides distrusted each other. As negotiations expert Colin McRobert says, trust is essential for negotiations to succeed.
About what the best practices are in negotiation. And the simple answer is the best practice in negotiation is always to negotiate in a straightforward and honest manner.
But what led the one-time allies to distrust each other? There are many reasons why the compromise failed. Here are some of the reasons why it failed. Ever since the Soviet Union had entered the war on June 22, 1941, they had pleaded that the United States open a second front. This front, however, wasn't opened until 1945. The Soviets also believed that the atomic bomb was made without them to keep them in a lower position. They feared that this weapon of mass destruction was going to be used against them by the United States. This already growing fear of the United States was increased when the Soviets became aware of the Western influence on their people, and they feared that their people would be led to armed revolt. They also feared being the only communist country in a world of democracy. The United States, on the other hand, was afraid of the ever-expanding Red Zone, the zone controlled by the Soviet Union and other communist countries. The United States knew that the Soviet Union's goal was to spread communism to all corners of the globe. This goal directly threatened the United States, so its leaders mistrusted and feared the Soviets and their intentions. This fear started in 1919 after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and increased after World War II with the Soviets gaining the atomic bomb and the Chinese communists coming to power in that country. U.S. leaders feared that unless communism was contained, it would pose a threat to them. During this time, anti-communist propaganda was also appearing in the United States, terrifying its population. The general public was behind their leaders in distrusting the Soviet Union's influence in their country and abroad. The third and final reason the compromise failed was because the two Korean leaders believed that they should rule the entire country and were willing to fight to achieve their dreams. Before the official war broke out, each side conducted fierce guerrilla attacks across the 38th parallel. Even though the Soviet Union and the United States supplied their respective countries with supplies, they had no control over what the leaders decided to do with the equipment. In January 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower became president, but the most crucial change was the death of Joseph Stalin, who was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who agreed with the United States that there should be a ceasefire. The peace talks began again, and on July 27, 1953, General William Harrison Jr., representing the United Nations, and Nam Tu from the Korean People's Army, signed an armistice that paused a war that is technically still continuing to this day. The armistice, which reinstated the compromise, has caused many disputes over territory, and there are questions if the armistice is still valid. Besides this, there have been questions about what the countries did wrong when negotiating the armistice agreement. Colin McRoberts again adds that
as what the countries did wrong in the course of the armistice negotiations. There are many possible answers to this, so I'll just focus on a theme which ran through the negotiations of the inability of the parties to trust each other's willingness to negotiate in good faith. One classic example of this was when North Korea postponed negotiations by insisting that United Nations aircraft had bombed the negotiation site at Kaesong. This probably didn't happen, and I realize that North Korea insists that it did and probably still does to this day, but we've seen over the last 50, 60 years a willingness on the part of North Korean negotiators to play games in the course of negotiations, and that's probably what was happening back at the original armistice negotiations as well.
Since the armistice, there has been a Cold War between North and South Korea. They have threatened each other, but never followed up on those threats. The demilitarized zone, the area that separates North and South Korea, is heavily protected. There are troops on it day and night. The relationship between North Korea, South Korea, as well as the United States has been tense. The United States has added North Korea to a list of rogue states and deemed North Korea a threat to world security, and repeatedly warned North Korea that they would not permit the development of their nuclear weapons program. However, the North Koreans again didn't listen to a world power and developed nuclear capability. Though the armistice was a compromise that ended a war, it has caused many disputes and can be considered a failure. The situation could have been different, however, if at Potsdam or at Panmunjom, the United States and Soviet Union could have come to an agreement on what economic system to install in Korea rather than dividing the country in two. They couldn't come to an agreement because they did not trust each other, a key part of a successful negotiation. Together, the Soviet Union and United States could have forced Ri and Il-sung to come together and establish a single government to benefit the Korean people. If only the United States and Soviet Union had compromised over how to keep Korea unified and worked with Korea, the years of turmoil and destruction could have been avoided. Many civilians and soldiers lost their lives in what could be called a pointless war. Along with the people who lost their lives, the bitter disputes and arguments that flood the news today could have been avoided. All of these things happened because of the failure of two compromises.